In Arambepe, by 1980, local manifestations of growing wealth disparities were visible to the naked eye. Social classes had formed in a once classless community. The poorest people were getting poorer, and the rich dramatically richer. Nowhere were the changes more obvious than in the fishing industry. Fishermen were getting fewer fish per day's labor than they had received in the 1960s, while boat owners were drawing 10 times their previous profits. Arambepe was firmly entrenched in a world political economy, partaking in a planet-wide process of cultural amalgamation. Mules and donkeys had become Mules and donkeys had become rarer than automobiles. Television antennas bedecked even modest homes, conveying transoceanic messages. Soon the international telephone system would reach out and touch Arambepe. These developments mirrored what was happening throughout Brazil. Nationally, the percentage of households with TV sets had increased from 7 to 51% between 1964 and 1979. Almost all Brazilian households had at least one radio. Brazil had become the world's fifth largest user of communications satellites for phones and TV transmissions. Communications satellites for phones and TV transmissions. Through electricity, villagers enjoyed the advantages of irons, water pumps, refrigerators, and freezers. Local people were licking their chops at the inventory of consumer goods. Future archaeologists excavating Arambepe of 1980 would surely uncover hundreds of different products designed and marketed by corporations based thousands of miles away. The paved highway had done the most to end Arambepe's isolation. Originally planned by an ambitious landlord to increase tourism and enhance land values, the road's early completion, coinciding with the hippie diaspora of 69-71, was assured by Tebras. A flood of tourists from Bahia joined the hippies and spurred the rise in property values and rents. The end of isolation transformed Arambepe's entire economy, bringing occupational plurality while changing the nature and role of fishing. Direct sale to tourists and easier access to wholesalers allowed ambitious villagers to replace outside fish marketers. Profits were plowed back into more costly fishing technology, including larger and much more expensive boats. As the value of property increased, so did the owner's share of the catch. This increased wealth differential so much that old level mechanisms became ineffective. Social relations in the fishing industry grew less social, more purely economic. Owners became bosses instead of co-workers. Given their traditional ideology of equality, Arambeperos resented these changes. Many stopped fishing, but a swell of immigrants helped fill the void. As the economy became more complex, so did local social structure. Arambepe was now divided by social class, occupation, neighborhood, province, and religion. Social deviance appeared and flourished. This chapter considers the most significant economic changes. The social consequences are examined in chapters 9 and 10. Some reasons for occupational diversity have been mentioned. Tourism created new jobs in construction, food preparation, lodging, and sales. Appendix 2 compares male employment in 1964, 1973, and 1980. It shows, for example, that 40% of Arambepe's employed men fished in 1980 versus 74% in 1964. Competing for second place in 1980 were factory employment, 17%, construction, 16%, and business, 14%. 40 Arambeperos now work for Tebras. Just a handful were fishermen who had shifted jobs. Most were young men, better educated than the past generation, who were working for the first time, with wages ranging from just over $100 to just under $500 per month. Factory workers made much more than fishermen did in 1980. Factory work also had more fringe benefits and pay was regular, not the fishermen's fluctuating and uncertain income. It wasn't just new opportunities on land that drew villagers away from fishing. There have been striking changes in fishing itself, most notably in the relations of production. The gap between boat owners and ordinary fishermen had widened enormously. To be sure, the cost of purchasing, outfitting, and provisioning a fishing boat had risen, but the owner's profit had grown disproportionately. In 1965, the captain owner had drawn 230% of the earnings of the ordinary fisherman for a day's fishing. By 1973, his share had increased to 300%. By 1980, the figure was 800%. A captain owner now got 75% of the catch. Understanding this dramatic break with traditional local egalitarianism requires discussion of major changes in fishing. Villagers were simultaneously being enticed away from fishing by better land-based opportunities and being driven away from it by changes in production and marketing. One obvious contrast with the past was the fleet size had diminished and boat size had increased. Only 19 boats were fishing in 1980 versus 26 in 73 and 31 in 65. Only one of the old-style open sailboats still fished in 1980 with a small motor. All the rest were classified as barcos rather than saveros, the term that for decades had been one of the most common words in daily discourse. Although new boats were much larger than the old ones with bigger motors and onboard ice chests, the main difference was the enclosed cabin, which slept three under cramped conditions. Most of the 1980 boats had been bought after 1973, with the cost of just a new motor at more than $2,500 US in August of 1980. A fully equipped boat cost at least $5,000. Dino, Tomei's younger brother, who now owned 5 boats, had just bought a large one for about $10,000. This figure far exceeded anything any villager could have afforded in the 1960s. With 3 or more boats, 4 villagers, including Dino, were millionaires in cruceros. Some of the experimentation with new fishing strategies evident between 1965 and 1973 could still be detected, though the fishing pattern was more set now. One of a handful of old-time fishermen could still afford to experiment. Dino had bought a shark net to take advantage of the recent arrival of red sharks in the area. The sharks, whose meat villagers could buy for half the cost of fish, reportedly congregated in the area where Tiber's residues flowed into the ocean. Use of gas lamps for nighttime fishing, which began in 1973, had been incorporated in the more general pattern of long-distance fishing, ice fishing, begun by Tomei in 1973 when he bought the first large motorboat with an enclosed cabin. Ice fishing involved travel to banks 8 to 10 hours north of Arambepe. Boats left Tuesday or Wednesday after loads of ice came in by truck from Salvador. During the 3 or 4 days they were gone, most fishing took place at night using bottled gas-fueled lamps. Fish were stored in the boat's ice chest. When the boat returned to Arambepe, the fish were taken to the owner's refrigerator, freezer, or ice vault. They stayed there until they were sold locally or to wholesalers from Itapuan, now just a 20-minute ride away. Most of the fleet was back in the harbor by Saturday evening, ready for Sunday socializing and a Monday of resting and taking care of obligations on land. By 1980, crews had plumbed bottoms and marked spots in the waters offshore from the communities of Soepe and Suboma. Neither of those northern fishing villages had a harbor to protect sailboats or motorboats, so raft fishing with small crews was customary there. As Arambepe's fishing territory incorporated these waters, their fishermen, particularly from Soepe, migrated to Arambepe. By 1980, they comprised a significant proportion of the fishermen in Arambepe. Most fishing was still done over the continental slope, less than 15 kilometers offshore in northern Baja, as in Arambepe. Although most boats did long-distance fishing, 2 captain owners preferred the old daytime fishing pattern. One was Fernando, the captain owner, whose excessive drinking, intense fear of outsiders, and rumored candomblé participation and habit of carrying a gun were mentioned in Chapter 6. Fernando had come to terms with the insecurities that had plagued him in 1973. He was content to pursue a relaxed style of fishing, leaving at 8:30 in the morning and returning around 5 in the afternoon. Motorization allowed him to reach the banks on the slope in 90 minutes, compared with 4 or 6 hours in the 1960s. Often Fernando fished closer to shore, where he caught smaller fish that could be used by the ice fishermen as bait for larger species they sought over the slope. The catches of Fernando and the 2 ordinary fishermen who accompanied him gave them food and some cash, but their annual catch was less than half of that of the ice fishing boats. Alberto called Fernando's fishing style silly, though it was based on a decades-old pattern. The new fishing style was much more productive, more than doubling a boat's average annual catch in the 1960s. The new pattern also relieved pressure on local banks, allowing some recuperation of the fish supply near Arambepe. Note that in 1980, only 2 small crews fished regularly in the banks that had once sustained the families of more than 100 fishermen, yielding more than 100,000 kilograms of fish annually. Even more striking than the change in the fishing pattern to one familiar with Arambepe's history of egalitarian social relations were changes in the allocation of fishing profits in the relations of production. Government loans through the Fishermen's Cooperative have facilitated the rapid motorization of the fleet, permitting industrious fishermen to add expensive motors. Successful fishermen soon repaid their debts and withdrew from the cooperative to market their own fish. It had been my impression in 1973 that the cooperative's days were numbered, since the price it offered for fish was lagging and since Aaron Bepe's traditional entrepreneurial pattern had always been one of pursuing individual self-interest. Because there had never been much community spirit, cooperatives could not succeed in Aaron Bepe if their goal was presented as community welfare. Success should Success could come only if individuals believed they were benefiting personally. Villagers had been willing to avail themselves of loans to increase their productivity and have access to ice, bait, gasoline, oil, and fishing supplies. But when more profitable options appeared, members felt no strong loyalty to the cooperative. The predicted failure of the cooperative came soon after my 1973 departure. After Tomei and Dino abandoned their agreed-on support to seek individual advantage, all the successful captain owners eventually withdrew from the cooperative and sought alternative marketing arrangements. Since the 1960s, Tomei had been Aaron Bepe's most innovative fisherman, the first fisherman to own his own sailboat, to buy an enclosed boat, to do ice fishing, to use the seafloor map to locate new fishing zones. Tomei also started a new marketing pattern. However, for reasons spelled out in Chapter 11, it was not Tomei but his brother Dino, an equally enterprising follower, who reaped the benefits. In late 1973, rather than selling either to the cooperative or to local land-based entrepreneurs, Dino arranged to have his catches taken to Itapoan, where a fish store offered a more profitable deal. Dino reinvested his profits in a second large fishing vessel. Dino then used this new source of income to retire from fishing, which he had always done reluctantly. Unlike Tomei, who spent 4 days a week fishing many miles north of Aaron Bepe, Dino could now devote full time to fish marketing. Dino joined two other non-fishing entrepreneurs who had also bought boats with enclosed cabins and hired captains to pilot them to the new distant fishing banks. Dino devoted his full attention to fish production and marketing. By 1980, he had become Aaron Bepe's most successful fish marketer and its richest resident. Owner of 5 boats, Dino had just paid the equivalent of $10,000 for the largest one. The first floor of his opulent 2-story house, a second story was a new local status symbol, was his fish store. It had Aaron Bepe's only ice vault, plus freezers and refrigerators. Other fish merchants had just the last 2 appliances. Besides his own 5 boats, Dino also bought fish from others and arranged transport to Itapoan of fish that weren't sold locally. No longer did agents from Salvador come to Aaron Bepe. Since marketing opportunities were ample in Itapoan and Aaron Bepe itself, representatives of 2 other Itapoan retailers also came on Fridays and Saturdays when the fleet returned, hoping to buy fish. Another agent drove in from the county seat. One immigrant rented his pickup truck to Dino and other local merchants to take surplus fish to Itapoan when the fish stores sent no agents. Across the street from Dino's house, in the shack where the cooperative had been housed, was another fish store. The shack had 3 large freezers where the catches of 5 boats could be stored. Like Dino's fish store, this one had several scales, checked regularly for accuracy by municipal officials. This was one among many examples of the increasing penetration of village life by the nation-state. Fish were still unloaded in the old harbor. Then the boat anchored in the new, deeper harbor just to the south. In the past, fish had been placed on the beach and divided among fishermen and owner. Now they were carried directly to one of the fish stores, where they were laid out on the cement floor. Another difference from the past, half by weight of each fisherman's catch was now turned over to the owner. Gone, along with the joint line system of pooling small fish, was the fiction of the boat's spit. By 1980, the owner's share was more accurately called the boat's half. As Alberto explained, the owner now made a double profit. First, he gets half of each fisherman's catch. The captain gets to keep his entire personal catch, so that captain gets twice the ordinary crew member's share. But even here the owner profits, because the captain, like the ordinary fisherman, must sell his fish to the owner for 70 cruzeros per kilogram. That's $1.17 at 60 cruzeros per dollar. The owner always sells the fish for much more than he pays the fisherman. Sometimes he finds local buyers for the fish at 120 cruzeros per kilogram. Sometimes he has to sell some fish to one of the Itapoan fish stores for just 100 cruzeros. Assuming half local sales and half exports, the owner's average resale profit at 110 cruzeros per kilogram was 40 cruzeros. Illustrating this differential allocation of the rewards of fishing is a is division of the catch of a boat that returned one Saturday in August 1980 after 4 days of fishing with a five-man crew. The owner also acted as captain. Weighed in his fish store, the total catch was almost exactly 200 kilograms. Each fisherman saw his catch, now identified with his mark, weighed separately. The weighing was done in the fish store by a salaried employee who also recorded the weight in a notebook. Each fisherman would eventually be reimbursed for half his catch at 70 cruzeros per kilogram after loans were subtracted. Fishermen often asked boat owners for advances against the week's work, money for their wives to buy food during their absence. Assume to illustrate simply that the five fishermen, including the captain owner, had each caught 40 kilograms. Each ordinary crew member would receive only 1,400 cruzeros, less than $25 for nearly 100 hours of grueling work in the open sea. The captain owner would add the 80 kilograms turned over by his crew to his own 40 kilograms, sold for an average price of 110 cruzeros per kilogram. These 120 kilograms would bring the captain owner 13,200 cruzeros. Add this to 3,200 cruzeros, the owner's profit between paying fishermen 70 cruzeros and selling their fish for 110 cruzeros. The captain owner's income amounted to 16,400 cruzeros. Once owner's expenses, 4,000 to 6,000 cruzeros per trip for fuel, bait, ice, food, and drinking water, were deducted, the profit was 11,000 to 12,000 cruzeros, or about $200. This was 8 times the earning of the ordinary fisherman. That adds up to 10,400 versus 1,300 annually. Depreciation of the boat and the owner's much greater risk, none of the boats was insured, have not been taken into account, nor has the fisherman's subsistence share. Crew members could keep 3 to 5 kilograms of their fish before beginning to share equally with the owner. Still, Dino and the other owners of 2 or more boats were making much more money than ordinary fishermen. No wonder Dino could afford to pay $10,000, 1 year's profits from one boat, to buy another one in July of 1980. The hope of making enough money from fishing to buy a boat had been realistic for an ambitious fisherman in the 1960s. By 1980, it had become an impossible dream. A boat now costs 5 to 10 times the ordinary fisherman's annual income. Just to repair a boat in July of 1980 cost over $300, more than an ordinary fisherman made in 3 months. Aaron Beppe had always had intelligent and successful entrepreneurs. A particular group of men, however, just happened to make their fortunes at the right time, when the wealth entering the village was greater than ever before, when entrepreneurial efforts could be parlayed into permanent assets. In a once egalitarian community, as the volume of wealth had grown and the traditional leveling mechanisms had become less effective, separate socioeconomic strata had appeared, and people were very much aware of their existence. Because of property and class, the Weberian Protestant capitalist ethic could no longer ensure a fisherman's success.